Who are you? Beneath the expectations, the labels, and the societal conditioning, what does it truly mean to become you? I'm John Fleming, the founder and lead practitioner of Becoming You. I created Becoming You out of a desire to share my own experience of becoming myself and to support others who are curious about who they are. From a young age, I have been driven by a desire to figure out who I am, why I'm here, and how I can belong while being myself. This is Becoming You, the podcast. Conversations about uncovering, embracing, and being your true self. A place where I dive deep into what it means and what is required to live life as your most authentic self. Through real, honest, and grounded conversations with professionals and people who are walking the path. If you're curious about identity, authenticity, and personal freedom, your own or others, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Claire, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, so I am Dr. Claire Stewart Hall, and I am a researcher, a practitioner, and a coach, an educator. I have worked for the last 10 years studying race and whiteness in leadership settings. I'm based in Bristol. I spent 20 years as an educator, as a qualified teacher and a head teacher. And now I work in, designing programs and coaching to support people to try and understand systemic injustice and how it shows up in their lives, in their settings, in the self, in the systems that they work within. So I have a wife called Roz. We've been together for 23 years, and I have a little girl who's 9 called Daisy. So I'm really pleased and excited to be here with you.
Thank you for sharing. It's great to hear, see the glee that came across your face when you talked about your wife and your daughter. Obviously really important relationships in your life.
You know, I think those relationships are hard won. They're hard won to be together for a long time, for 23 years in any LGBTQ relationships. It's hard. You know, it's really, really hard living in normative practices, and I feel, proud.
So you should be.
I turned 50 this year as well, so I feel like I'm enjoying the point of looking back and going, haha, I dealt with things ages ago. It's also been
Absolutely not. Enjoy it. You deserve it. Yeah. And what a lovely reflection to be sharing. It's a Monday morning and Brighton Pride has just happened over the weekend, and I was watching it all play out in social media and thinking, oh, how nice. And the city I'm from, Cork, it was Pride there this weekend as well. And I have a Pride flag hanging from my balcony, which might seem like such a small thing to have a flag flying from one's property, but actually is a really big deal. I live in a very rural part of Ireland, and it's a statement. My Pride flag is the only Pride flag flying in this town right now. That statement isn't always easy because people know that I live in that apartment, so they start to wonder. They might start to turn away from me. You know, all sorts of things could happen.
It helps people position you.
Yes.
For example, I was just saying before the recording that I went to, I was in London at the weekend, and there was London Trans Pride. And it was heartening. You know, I can remember going to Pride 30 years ago, and it was me and my friends in a car park opposite the local gay pub with people spitting at you and throwing things at you. And there was something emotional and overwhelming, I think, about just seeing tens. We were right at the front of the march by accident, but when we left, it was about 15 minutes of people passing to get to the end of the queue, and that there's something heartening about that, about people clapping on the side of the street. So yeah, it is a big deal. I can see people looking at us and in curiosity, or having something, or it's sparking something that I might have to deal with. So I think, and it can be as simple as having a pride flag outside your house.
Yeah, well, I'm 35, and it's taken until this year for me to feel like I'm courageous enough, and also kind of like don't care enough
and I mean that sincerely rather than a kind of protective, I genuinely don't care. Whereas I think up until this point, a part of me did.
Well, I think the fear, I guess there's my central nervous system will take over
Yeah.
and say, Claire, you're not safe. And that's exhausting. That's really tiring. Either trying to make it safe. I sometimes describe myself as a gateway lesbian in that I'm the lesbian that people go, oh, she's all right. So I can make people, I've spent my life making people feel okay, trying to kind of warm people up to like not be homophobic.
Have you ever heard Panty's speech, the Irish drag
Yeah.
queen? And in that speech, Panty talks about Breda probably doesn't mind the local gay boy who's the interior designer because he does a really good job when he does up her living room, and that's also a sort of gateway thing, isn't it? Like where we make ourselves tolerable or funny, and that's the hope. Then is that people will go, oh well, actually they're okay.
We recently have 2 gay men who've moved into our street only this week, and honestly, we were like, "Hi, I was like, are you gay?" And they said, "Yes, are you?" And we were like, "Yes." They said, "Oh, we're the only ones." I mean, for goodness sake, it's 2025 and 50 years old, and it's still there. It's still there. It makes you realise how much you're navigating, and I guess there's something about hiding.
Yeah, I just think it's so interesting because of the question that I've lined up for you from the previous guest. And then we've just kind of spontaneously ended up having this conversation because the question I had for you was, is there a part of you that you're still hiding?
And I think that I've done a lot of work. I've done a lot of kind of uncovering for myself, I think, mostly based on feedback. So I've used in my life, I did psychotherapy every week for 15 years. I religiously, and I only stopped because the woman retired. But I've always had a coach, a mentor, someone who can support me. But even in that space, I hid from my own self on my own dollar for quite a few years. So the bits that I'm hiding, where I've got up to, I've done a lot of work on family and trying to be really clear about my role in the family. I've done a lot of work on that and how to be in alignment with my values when my family habitat is really different to the life that I choose to lead. I'm the only one who's left. Everybody else stayed. And I'm the person that comes back. I'm the disruptor, So I've had to work really hard on that. The bit, I suppose, that which is a lot of my work, is around race and whiteness. I research whiteness. I'm a former research fellow at the University of Oxford. But prior to that, I have spent a lot of time in my life trying to understand how I have been racialized as a white person, that white doesn't exist, that we've made up what white is and its status in the society that we choose to live in. And I don't know, I guess the bits that I'm hiding are the bits that I've been socialized into just being normal for me. And actually, the more I learn about race and the more I learn that I have memories that I've repressed, I have situations that I haven't override. So it's less about kind of conscious hiding and more about, I wouldn't even call it unconscious or ignorance. The big part of whiteness is the extent to which white people are innocent of because I think if you're, the racism, I'm still uncovering where my own racism is. I dedicate my work to practices that help people do that in a humane, therapeutic way that means that people don't run from it, but run towards it. So yes, I have flashes of racist thoughts and racism in the car, for example. It's so fleeting. So even if you focus on it on one way, like I might be able to hold boundaries with my family, for example, I still struggle with boundaries over there. So just because I've read lots of books, just because I've intellectually begun to study whiteness and I write about it, I post about it, I blog about it, I do podcasts about it. I'm working in systems that normalize white supremacy. So it'd be very surprising, wouldn't it, if I was if I was the one that escaped. So I have to kind of question white supremacist thinking that's alive in me, that I was told was normal, was normalized and utilized in my socialization.
You got recommended to me by a mutual friend.
Mm.
And the context of that is I was doing some professional development and met this person. And, you know, through various different things that happened in conversations, I think they became aware that I was really interested in racism and my own potential racism, and particularly some challenges I have about being a white man, and particularly the combination between being a cis white man that goes on for me, because in other ways I'm very divergent and queer. So being gay, being neurodivergent, and then I have this, what is quite a normative experience of being a cis white man, and sometimes the two just don't align for me. It's like, oh, this is like the jigsaw puzzle that just does not fit together. You know, it's just, it doesn't feel good. It feels really difficult. And at times I've really struggled with being a man. I actually thought at one point, I'm not sure if I am a man. And then I realized that some of that was just, I wanted to get away from being a white man. And then I've come back around on that again. And through this mutual friend of ours becoming aware of some of this for me, suggested your white accountability groups, which I started going to at the start of this year, which you run monthly. And it's been, I think I said after the first one, like, this has been the place I've been looking for several years. I think like a lot of people after George Floyd died or murdered, yeah, I had a kind of like, I can't sit on this anymore. I can't be silent. I can't pretend that there isn't something going on internally and hope that it will just go away. And up until that point, I hadn't really had a space to talk about whiteness or white supremacy or racism that wasn't very loaded and charged and kind of actually unhelpful. And I love what you just said about, I wanted to create spaces that people run towards rather than run away from. Because when you said that, I had an immediate sense in my whole system of like, okay, great. This is something I want to run towards. I want to explore it. I want to, in a sense, uncover it, find out what's in there. And I've learned so much in the last 2 years that I just didn't know. Also about how white people are racialized as well, and how that impacts us. Because I think when you begin to pull the thread on these things, or at least this is the experience I'm having, you start to see how all of the systems of oppression are interconnected. And I probably am really annoying my friends at the moment because I seem to be just going, well, the root cause of everything is colonization and capitalism. It's like, oh, it goes back to this. And that's what's connected us. And I thought it would be great to have a conversation about uncovering whiteness and really putting something out into the personal development space about how that can also be a part of a personal development journey. Because people don't immediately think of that when they think of going to therapy or coaching. And how we all get racialized actually has a big impact on our sense of self and how we relate to others, right?
Absolutely. And where I begin in those ideas as a researcher is that the outcome of our lack of awareness of being racialized is not a coincidence. It's not coincidental. It's been organized as such, that the race is highly organized and highly strategic in the global north and the global south, I would say, to result in groups being white groups being advantaged in lots of different ways. And I think the most pernicious part of it is a feeling that I had where I thought I can't actually trust my memories because there's been so much that has been epistemologically left out. The version of history that I've got, it's a selective version like, what don't I know? Like, I thought I was taught history, but then there's loads of the parts of my socializations that has left me quite inept, really, in lots of ways, to hold conversations about race and try and fear that. And I think that is in the body. And Resmaa Menakem talks a lot about that in his book about racialized trauma. And what he frames about white experience is that the way that we think about race and the way that we think about trauma is based on, it is in the body. So it's inherited. So we have an inheritance, which is a trauma that becomes racialized. So if we look at the history of white people in Europe, the brutal history around race and enslavement and colonialization. And I think the biggest thing in England, in the UK and in Ireland is around looking away, the ability to look away from trauma and not to process it. Just don't look at it and do something else. It's reminding me of a really funny Irish comedian who did this in her show that I went to see this year, Deirdre O'Kane. Do you know Deirdre O'Kane?
Yes, I do, yeah.
She, the whole second part of her, it didn't land great with the audience. It didn't land very well, but I completely understood what she meant, where she talked about how people don't want to face, she was talking about trauma in terms of illness and how people would rather go to the pub, but don't want to have conversations about it because it's too painful and we're not very good at talking about traumatic experiences. And so we'd just prefer to look away. And I think that when we look at that through a race lens, it's really easy to look away from, to just not see, not show it on the news, not show what's happening to children in Gaza, for example, or what's happening to children in America, what's happening to children in South Sudan. We're really good in the global north at looking away. It's part of in fact, it's easier to look away. I'm trained to do that. As my mum was, as her mum was, that's part of our carrying on, just carry on. And of course that has a kind of class and a gender intersection. As a person, I'm curious in terms of uncovering whiteness, how can I develop the tools and how can I support other people to develop the tools to try and understand how they have been racialized? Because they have been. And I think I grew up thinking, don't talk about race. The surest way to not look like a racist or not have racist thoughts, don't get them out, for goodness sake, and like work them out and talk about them. Tuck them off away, pretend you haven't got them. But what it does is I talk about it in my work as kind of leaving very often white people and people who've been racialized as white as really immature, really kind of like building blocks. We're right at the stage of building blocks. And my hope is that through creating spaces to talk about race and developing the bandwidth, which is what Eugene Ellis says, to have the race conversation, we need to widen the zone of tolerance so it doesn't freeze me and I don't completely shut down, so that we can widen the zone of tolerance so that people can say, yeah, I can hear feedback about race. And then I can get that thing out and I can go, yes, that is an interesting bit of me, rather than looking away and saying, well, I just won't see that person, or I'll just store that up to the next person from the global majority who challenges me about race, and then they'll get that trauma from that I felt.
It's another form of masking, isn't
Yes.
it? Which I think unconsciously is probably why I chose that word, uncovering, because I think there's so much about ourselves and the world we live in that we need to uncover. Well, I think it's a need, because that's my perspective on it, because I want to be conscious and I want to improve myself. But yeah, masking is a tricky thing because it's so societally encouraged, and schooling really backs that up. It's like almost like a training for it.
And that's borne out in research, that this one of the central pillars of how white supremacy continues is through education. It's a central mechanism. And we can see that in the States of America, where Native American children were civilized. I'm saying that in inverted commas, or socialized into whiteness. We can see that in Australia, where they had a whiteness policy. And education was a central tool, which is where my work has begun. But I think the term masking I think this is more pernicious than that, in that I think masking sometimes is to not cause a disturbance or a disruption or kind of keep myself small in here in order to let the norms continue. But there's something about, I think the challenge of studying race for me as a white person and for bringing people to this space is that I benefit from it, right? I benefit from being quiet about it, from masking. It's not as if that's the end of the story. The story continues in that I'm more likely to receive gifts and do receive gifts and advantages for not challenging, for not disrupting, which perpetuates, for not putting a flag up or a symbolic flag up. I benefit from not disturbing. And sometimes that whole idea, certainly when I did my PhD, my interviews, leaders said that they even had an imagined idea of a global majority people rocking the boat. They would use terms like that. Like, well, I would say, why do teams remain white? What keeps teams white? What is it? And actually turns out it's the behaviors of leaders. It's the comforts of leaders, white leaders, that keep, not only white leaders sometimes, that keeps people white, because somebody's fantasy of what that discomfort actually is projected. A person from the global majority who then becomes these fears or fantasies that people have, a potential disruptor, which of course isn't true. It's a kind of, spectre of the kind of white imagination that people have. So it's pernicious. And I think when you were talking about the murder of George Floyd and that moment, I'd started researching before that. So it was a very interesting time to research when things shifted. But I spent years and years as a leader and a manager working with children from the global majority in a school where most of the children had preschool meals. And I tried every which way I could, using every single policy that was available to me. And at the time, if you'd met me 20 years ago, I'd say the main barrier was class. It was social class. It was nothing to do with race. Actually, anybody can succeed. And that's part about my own class transition, I think. But I tried every which way, and it just continued. Each time there would be another hurdle around race that systems just in every which way. And once you begin to see things from that perspective, you appreciate that actually we need to do more, particularly as white people who are upholding those systems, have to do more, have to kind of break away from the thinking that goes along with how we're meant to be, and start going, actually, we can do this differently, because those systems don't mean anything if it's the people who are doing them that we have power to shift. So that's my work. And of course, all of those contribute to a structure of whiteness that's kind of upheld by the people, peddling within it.
Yeah, and it often felt like to me that there was nowhere to go. Like there was books on offer. I don't read. I've never read a book in my life, so those books were kind of never going to happen for me. But I think I was looking for connection.
Yes.
To explore this. I was like, the only way that was ever going to work for me, I needed to be in contact with other people and talking about this. And I made a couple of clunky attempts at that, I think, after George Floyd's murder. I reached out to a friend of mine who was a person of colour to try and talk to him about it. And I was curious about his experience of growing up as a person of colour. But I reflected on that afterwards, and I was like, that's so self-serving. And like, did he really want to talk to me right then about that? And I addressed that with him afterwards, and I attempted to have conversations with other people, but it always fell flat. And I have to say that really, until I started going to your white accountability spaces, I felt like I was just adrift. I was like, this is something that is unresolved. I'm not quite sure where to go, what to do with it. I'd started, I think, to join up some of the dots around oppression, like around some of the shared experiences that systemic oppression impacts, like the intersectionality aspect of class, of race, of religion, sexuality, gender identity. That was becoming clear to me. But the race piece, I was like, I have no vocabulary for this. I don't know where to talk about it. Having a space to talk about it is life-changing. Genuinely. Because like you were just saying, if you don't talk about it, it just continues. Silence is complicity, really.
Yeah, and it's a bit like, I know my sexuality. I spent years trying to get to know myself, getting rid of, who am I without internalized homophobia? It was my first challenge because I was just full of internalized homophobia. I understand my class self. I understand what it means to begin life as a working class person and live in a council house and then gain money and watch my parents gain money because they wanted more and more. And, they were rapidly trying to get out of working classness. That was my kind of habitus. So I understand my class self. I've done that work. And if those people were separated, say, and they were all part of a team, they were all speaking in a group, my raced self would be silent. And I just think, gosh, what would happen if it's not beyond the will and wit of white people to develop a voice? Like, let's find out, because all of that energy and power could be better deployed. W.E.B. Du Bois in the 1890s said that the role of black and brown people is, the black imagination is to develop the black imagination. That's what people, in his version, that's what people are here for. Actually, the challenge of racism belongs to white people.
Yes.
It's something about us, and James Baldwin says the same thing, until white people work out why they wanted enslaved people. That's the question, really. And I do lots and lots of coaching and mentoring and supporting, but I really veer away from deficit ideas that we need to change black and brown people in order for systems to be better. So my question is always, what are you doing with the white team who are appointing? What support do they have in order to check? Because that's where it happens. Because we can see black excellence everywhere. It's not necessarily in a team, because white people find that really challenging. One of the questions that I've been asking on my podcast is, what does whiteness hate? What does whiteness really hate? What does it just despise?
Probably itself.
Yeah, probably itself, but also black organizing.
Yes.
When it's shut out. Really, and I feel that in my body as well. I know that's there because I can feel it. So it's this kind of dual. What I'm trying to do is kind of step out of whiteness, divest from it, stop being in the whiteness club, as Ignatieff and Garvey say, and develop spaces. And what I've learned so far is that it's a praxis and a practice that I need to keep practicing and developing different ways that are humane ways and supportive ways to try and understand how this assembles in my life. Because otherwise I'm not living my whole life. I'm living a kind of version that I've been socialized into. And I want to know those things so that I can deal with them. In the same way that I have had to take out parts of my lesbian identity and look at transophobia. So just because I'm a lesbian doesn't mean that I'm not transphobic. I have to take those issues out. I don't get to say, none of us get to say, well, because I'm gay, I'm not transphobic. No, you don't. Nobody gets that. Just because I'm a woman doesn't mean that I'm not sexist. I have to get those things out and look at them and process them. We need to do the same with race, because otherwise, how on earth are we going to dismantle?
And it's a choice, right? It's not just something that happens through life. You need to choose to do this work.
Yes.
And you need to commit to it, in not for other people, but for yourself. When we talk about whiteness, because I feel like I have a handle on it, and I mean handle, I'm not saying that I see the full picture, but I have a handle on it. And you study whiteness and racism and research it and work with it all the time. For people listening, they might be like, yeah, well, what is it? As in, I might be a white person listening in. What is whiteness? How can you identify it? What might be some of the things that you can observe about whiteness?
So whiteness is a structure. So it's less about white skin, but it's structure. It's almost like a kind of reference point. I describe it as a compass. So it's like a kind of compass that's decided that true north is white. And so that's the bit so it's all of those things that magnetize you towards it. So I think it's it looks different in different countries, but it shares a similar idea of what successful is, of what order is. There's a big part of it that's about order, what power looks like, what control looks like, how things are meant to be done. And sometimes you can feel that when you walk in a room. I certainly can. It mobilizes stereotypes, it mobilizes ideas and discounts whatever it isn't. So, for example, not being late, perfectionism is really welcomed in Whiteness. So a kind of idea of meritocracy, that the people who are at the top, the people who are really successful, the people who worked most, like hardest for it, and therefore deserve it, are deserving of it. A sense of politeness, a certain way of speaking, of manners, even table manners, a certain way of being that we gravitate to and that we're taught to gravitate to. And they're micro things that add up to you will be successful if. And it even results in I think, in body shape. Certainly it has a sexuality, it has a kind of norm. It creates these ideas of what is normal that people can then go, oh, that's a reference point. And interestingly, in my interviews, the way that it showed up was people said things like, oh, she had the same pad as me. We had the same make of pen. There was so they're kind of alignment, like how can people get it? So it's a structure that helps people get into alignment and it rejects other people. So one of the things that Deleuze and Guattari write about is they call it white man face. So they say there's a kind of checking system that goes in place. And I know that it's there because I know that I find myself justifying my family or making it okay. That I think that's part of it. I'm interested in whiteness and sexuality as well, and middle classness and working classness and all of those norms that you can feel in the room. It's a structure. So I guess there's a challenge for all of us in terms of how much do we play to that or adhere to that in order to get on.
Yeah, I think that's really important clarification because it's so easy to hear the word whiteness and think that it's about the color of skin and that it's limited to that because it's so much more and it's pervasive in society, whiteness. And for me, when I started coming to your groups, it was like I started to join up all the dots to other things that I had noticed about, like one of the things that's in a document you shared with me about, like, it always gives preference to the written word. And that's a form of whiteness that really impacts neurodiverse people, particularly people who really don't like reading or writing, and are often seen to be disordered if you don't read or write, rather than actually I just process information and learn differently, and I'm perfectly okay the way I am. But there's an element of whiteness in that, that for me was hugely significant when I read it because I was like, I fucking knew I was okay. You know, I was like, because in that moment I was able to take back some of that power that I lost from the oppression. So I think that it's so important to open your mind to these things. That yes, of course, it's about race and about the color of skin, and often at a symptomatic and problematic level, and that's where in society it gets tricky because things like the George Floyd murder happen. People get persecuted, people get unfairly treated, people get targeted, and people get policed differently because they're identifiable.
And killed.
Yes, and killed.
With that, it's not even as, I mean, that's an interesting scenario because, you know, what we watched, that horrifying, traumatic video that was watched all over the world was somebody who was asking to breathe. I mean, that's an example, was asking to breathe. So that's how, and the not noticing of Derek Chauvin, that's how the override is, how powerful that override is. And I think it's interesting, isn't it? How lots has been written about why that was such a powerful moment globally. And it's partly because we couldn't look away. Circumstances where, that happens every single day. That happens every single day. then that's really overwhelming, because the world, it's not on the news. And that's what I've been taught, is how to prioritize what's important. Is it'll be on the BBC. Well, it isn't on the BBC, and it's only thanks to people divesting from whiteness and going, no, I will stand outside Downing Street, and I will risk being arrested if I stand outside the courts and kneecap, or I hold a Palestinian flag. That, you know, that it's because of those that's added pressure. It's the collective.
We are kind of seeing a global play out of that at the moment with Palestine.
Yes.
You know, where you have people who want to be measured, say, well, you know, we don't really know whether it's a genocide or not. And it's like, okay, right.
Mm.
That's another form of looking away.
Yeah.
Or, you know, don't fly a flag because that's very provocative. Another form of looking away. It's like, there is something about whiteness for me that is very much about like comfort.
Yeah.
I just want to maintain my comfort levels because it's inconvenient for me not to be comfortable.
And of course, what does looking at do for us? It triggers empathy. It triggers our empathy. So when you empathize with something, you can't look away. You have to do something because it's bothering you and it begins to hurt you. And I think that's where, when you dehumanize a population, which is what has happened over many, many, many years, you know, centuries really, and particularly the last 2 decades, regularly, oh, that's happening. A kind of dehumanization of people where, you know, in what other, you know, I can't think of another conflict which is being funded where journalists wouldn't be allowed in to report. When actually the ammunition and the bombs that are being dropped on people, you know, where would that happen? It just wouldn't happen. We'd cut ties. I mean, it would be very surprising if it wasn't orchestrated in order to stop people feeling empathy. But the fact that there are thousands and thousands of people who turn out every weekend, I think means that the socialization doesn't work, because people do feel empathy. And I think I have hope that white people want to change systemic racism. They don't want to be part of that. They're constantly every weekend, not in my name. I don't want to be part of that. So I think what we need to do is evolve and develop, like, let's organize then. Let's collectively organize, because I don't think, it's kind of like a hoodwinking. It's like people are being hoodwinked. And actually people don't. It's like when you meet people who are part of homophobic practices, and then you meet them and think, you're not a homophobe. Actually, you're not. I can feel it from you. I can feel that you aren't. And I think actually there isn't anybody who can look at those images and say that isn't a genocide. We could talk about it forever, but I think actually that we've been given the ability to empathize for a reason. You know, the universe is providing this to us in order to use it. I think people need to use it and act on it. And I think people feel the color blindness state, the color evasive state of going, oh, I don't want to have that conversation. What happens when we go in? Let's give ourselves the tools to go in and try and connect and resolve. And then what can happen? I think we can make huge leaps forward as a group of people, because I don't want to be part of a you know, race doesn't exist, but a whiteness that prioritizes that. There are two kind of camps of whiteness. One is around, can we reform it? Can we change it? Can we make it better? Can we practice a better way? Can we reshape it? Or do we just need to abolish the whole lot and start again?
The second one.
Yeah.
Please. Like, well, I don't want to have a makeover. You know, like that's just it. That's cosmetic. That's another element of whiteness.
Yeah.
You know, that's just paint it.
Yeah. I remember people saying that when marriage was introduced and civil partnerships were introduced. And, you know, there were loads of lesbian and gay people and trans people who said, fuck off, I don't want to get married. I'm not doing what I'm doing, that version now, because it's been granted. Fuck off. Gay, lesbian people and trans people have been married for centuries. We've done our own thing. We don't need to assimilate to a kind of heteronormative idea of to make it palatable and acceptable. That being said, to straight people, that's meant an awful lot to people like my mum and dad, because they're like, oh, I
Yeah.
get it. I understand it now. So there is something about, I don't know I'm hopeful about what can be manifested between when white people choose to look at their own racism and create.
And if people listening were like, yeah, but where do I start? What do I do? What would be the one thing that you would recommend somebody to do if they were to read a book or listen to a podcast, or what meaningful steps could people do to address
Well,
their
I think
own white?
the first step in, as a coach, and I've been coaching I'm a transformational psychodynamic coach. I've been coaching for a long time. And I think in order to shift the pattern, the first thing you do is notice. You start with where you are and you notice how race shows up in your life, and you choose to just observe. So I would just observe and write down and reflect. But I journal every day. I run race identity coaching sessions where I work with people for, I don't know, I do a short batch of 3 or a group of 6. And I support people to think about how they were racialized, how they've become racialized. The salience of race. I mean, Resmaa Menakem's book, My Grandmother's Hands, is a brilliant opening. He talks about white bodies, bodies of color, and blue bodies. So he talks a lot about the police. So I guess it's wherever it's coming up is just observing and writing on that. But I run programs. So I have a new program called Divest Whiteness, which is a structured 6-month program for people to come into the space with other people who want to work, because I believe this needs to be in community. That's where a lot of power is. Because when you're talking about race, you're going to be in community.
Yeah.
You're going back out into the world. I run anti-racism programs and I run leadership programs, or you can do individual work. But that's where I would start, is noticing. Start noticing and observing.
And you've got a podcast.
I've got a podcast called Whiteness at Work, and I talk to people who are interested in whiteness, but in order to utilize the experience of talking about whiteness.
I would highly recommend your podcast, because before you started interviewing people, right, there's a series of episodes where you speak and you give a kind of an overview / introduction and all of the context and framing.
Yeah.
And that was so valuable when I listened to it. So I wanted to encourage that as well for people who are not readers but want to access information. I highly recommend it. Was it like the first 6 episodes?
Yes, it is. It is the first 6, and I hope to use those as a method of, I guess, accelerating people's experience before I talk to them, so that they come with questions, or they come with, I haven't thought about it like that. Because there is so much material out there, but there's something, I think, it's interesting you say the word hiding. There is a kind of hidden part of it that is, it's not an active curiosity for most people. You have to do some work in order to get there. It's really attached to shame, I think. So just reflecting in the privacy of your own home, I think, about some of these concepts that people have been talking about for hundreds of years, but they're not prioritized, that whiteness doesn't, the systems that have delivered me to where I am allowed me to not think about race unless it came up socially.
Yeah. Thank you, Claire.
You're welcome.
What question would you like to ask our next guest?
I would ask, what role has race had in your life?
Great. Well, I should ask that to the next person I have on. And what's your parting sentiment from the conversation we've had?
I think that there's something really magical that can happen between people who have an active curiosity and an openness to talk about race that I think is electric. It's magical. And I think that, that as a source, using that as a source for development, for what could we do, what could we write about, or what can come from that, I think is a really untapped resource, untapped power, that I think that people can use, because unless people do that, I feel like people aren't living their whole lives.
Yeah.
And actually what's happening is the expectation is that lots of people from the global majority are masking. So we don't even know the potential of what would happen.
Yes, exactly.
We've got no idea what we could become. So in that way, I think, it's conversations like this that make me realize I talk to lots and lots of people about race. And when I talk to, white people who are open as you are, it makes me think, gosh, it's just the beginning of the conversation. And that there is so much potential to change systemic racism, and that white people also lose from systemic racism. That we all lose.
Yeah, it's a lose-lose situation.
So yes, it's wonderful to talk to you. And it's wonderful to talk to people who, because you've been coming, and I'm sure you were coming to the sessions, but it means that we're there. Yeah, there's a magical, like Narnia.
Yeah.
When will we end up
if
we continue talking?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, my thing is do the work, because we need it as a global society. We need it. And I think we need to move beyond doing things just for ourselves, but do it for yourself and others. Great. Thank you, Claire.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. It's great to have you and great to talk about this topic.
Thank you for listening. I'm curious about what this conversation has stimulated for you. Thoughts, feelings, curiosity. If this episode intrigued you, hit follow to be notified about new episodes. I know these conversations are valuable to me, and if you think they're valuable too, please do leave a review. Leaving a review allows more people to discover the podcast. You can scroll down to ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts and click write a review. You can also connect with Becoming You on Instagram and TikTok by searching the handle at becoming_you__. The links are in the show notes too. You can also visit www.becomingyou.ie to explore the idea of becoming yourself. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.